you. So yeah, I'm Laura Henry. I'm a freelance director, producer, motion graphic designer, artist and photographer. I'm currently wearing my producer hat where I'm at the moment, but I've been in the animation and filming industry for the past 10 years and have produced content for numerous and diverse clients, everything from promos to music videos, documentaries with clients such as MTV, Sony, NBA, London Fashion Week, Netflix, and a host of other brands, as well as filming content for artists and festivals like Rudimental, Human League, and Tina Turner, to name a real mix. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to present here this evening for you guys, particularly around such an important theme as diversity and inclusion. I'd like to weave my own experiences and work within a feminist context, and some thoughts on gender and being a woman within this industry, which is obviously something I can talk about. I can't speak for everyone's experience. So to start with, I'd like to play you a couple of short reels, one of which was put together this afternoon, so do forgive me, to give you a sense of a handful of things I've worked on and a convenient time for you to make a run for it if I've already put you off. So, ooh. Just let these things play out. It's okay.
Yeah, you can put the voice down. You want to keep going.
No, it's okay. Yeah. I'm going to leave it go. So I could slip through this, I think. Yeah. So I'm gonna stop that there because it goes on a little bit longer than that, and that should give you an idea. And I'll show you just a tiny bit of this motion graphics reel. So, on that, all that colour and noise, I'd like to bring the mood right down. If I see one more murdered woman, laziness, victimization, and other tales, I began watching and enjoying BBC's latest iteration of a crime drama recently. And don't get me wrong, this isn't a protracted critique of the programme, or indeed an assassination of BBC drama, of which I'm a huge fan actually. But more how a quick Google search of reviews reveals a growing fatigue, as author Jojo Miles succinctly puts it. I'm so bored of seeing women physically and sexually abused in the name of drama. That's it for me. And along with many other viewers, one commented specifically and very thoroughly. In one episode, we got a gratuitous shower shot of a character before she was coerced into sleeping with her boss. The camera lingered as she lay topless in bed and stood at her bedroom window naked for little apparent reason. Meanwhile, another female character was snatched, beaten up and thrown onto waste ground for the obligatory corpse shot. Well, sorry David Hare, but the facts that director S.J. Clarkson is female, Carey Mulligan is playing the lead detective, you know what it is yet, and the cast features strong female characters aren't enough to balance out such tired sexist tropes. And the thing is, this sexist trope, whilst being a whole discussion unto itself, and something I'd like to expand further on, led me to thinking about female representation within film and literature as a whole, and my experiences of stories I've told or been employed to tell, or indeed read over and over again since way before that. There are thankfully now infinite imperative discussions about, and one hopes, a turning tide of disillusionment with said trope. That within film, young boys have heroes, superheroes, action men, any number of strong, autonomous male characters to idolise. The strong, silent and very physical protagonist that is undoubtedly problematic for young boys too, albeit in a different way. And that's a whole other discussion as well. But even within rom-coms, with very few exceptions, allegedly targeting a particular audience, we are faced with a flipped coin of this same narrative. 90 minutes of a woman that is, like all tried and tested fairy tales, incomplete, is wanting to be rescued by our handsome young male protagonist. And if she isn't sufficiently wanting, she's either at best demonized for embracing her sexuality, or at worst to suffer a violence, sexually, emotionally, or physically. And all of this is paradoxically running in tandem with the heroic male presence, which brings me to my first experience of working on an animation. Lilas Says is a short novella which was to be the basis of our final animation piece in uni back in 2006. And as an exercise, it was perfect fodder. How to illustrate something complex and heavy through the medium of motion graphics. Something which has been incredibly useful throughout my career so far, that and how to make dense financial texts sexy. So the story is of a young girl, the novel's namesake, whose experience is narrated through the eyes of a young boy. If anyone's read this, I apologise for kind of going over this. She's outwardly and sexually confident and an experienced teenager, bewitching and beguiling our young narrator, but is, as we later find out, neither of these things. She was using her latent sexuality as a defence and bravado in the same way that the male characters do. Her fate is, of course, sealed. And apologies for the spoiler, but as the boys had suffered a humiliation, they couldn't have her. She has to suffer rape and death. So when I was at uni, my women's studies class that I was taking alongside my course was still one of the smaller classes. I'm so glad that doesn't seem to be the case so much more. And the things we were delving into there on gender theory and performance versus performative nature of gender, etc., was coexisting with my now forensic unpicking of a novel that serves as an example of just how damaging those societal constructs are. So, and once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? It's everywhere, and you realise just how prolific it is. So how do I believe, or indeed how do we turn those tables of depicting women as these suffering victims the media so often likes us to be and is reliant on us being? And stir us for the strong, sexual, fierce and fallible individuals that we are. I'm going to touch on that very shortly, but first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience as a woman within this industry, and how I feel my gender has been a factor or not a factor from the off. So, on leaving university, I did what everybody does, and I started to Google as many production companies as I could. And I managed to get, this was the time when you could send a physical CD or DVD as a showreel of your work. I don't remember any of my peers having a website or even a Vimeo. And our final films were on DV tapes, so even having a DVD was pretty spectacular. Fortunately, my illustration style has moved on from the goth years of its creator, and I opted for something a little bit more mainstream, so apparently it was a phase mum. In response to the old designer adage, that you have about 10 seconds from a hand to bin to get the attention of a director, I'd wrapped my DVD in an intricately folded sheet of paper, illustrations on one side and my CV on the other. And out of the scores that I contacted, I managed to get an audience with just a couple. And on leaving those, I was incredibly disheartened. Not because of critique of my work, which one would expect, but because I left them all without any tangible sense of what they actually made of my work. There was the tedious ending the meeting early because the paper wrapping of my showreel was not in recycled material. To the plain bizarre, my watch was ticking far too loudly. It was too distracting. So all one can imagine with the sole aim of, and in my case then successful aim, of demeaning you. And I walked into these very male-dominated worlds with all the naivety one would expect. And whilst I passed off the experience as a necessary preparing for the real world, I've since been in the position to interview and talk to graduates myself many times over, and I've realised there's unequivocally no need. So far, so normal perhaps, until I had a different point of experience to compare it to. A good friend of mine was attending a talk at in London Bridge of a design collective that did some pretty cool stuff, and asked if I wanted to go along. Now, I was in the habit then of always having this origami wrapped DVD with me at all times, much in the contrast to how I always forget to have business cards with me now. The event was encouraging, fascinating and friendly. There was hummus and wine, always a winner. And the director, Glenn Boddington, who some of you may be familiar with here, was an absolute powerhouse, and I knew I had to speak to her afterwards. Surprisingly, no comment was made about what I was wearing, my words, or my inexperience, in fact, but an invitation to pop along to the office the next day and meet the team. Let's have a sip of water. So the next 4 years were spent with this multidisciplinary design collective, Body Data Space, with Glenn and team bringing artists from all over the world to create and curate work around the body and technology, and how the body and connectivity can and do work together. We worked in collaboration with dancers and explored cross-continent communication through dance and how bodies interact with each other in these digital spaces. Really fascinating stuff. And what's key here is that not only was I working with what was in the immediate a very female-centric environment, but it was the way we were looking at the body, and in particular the female body, and how it can be expressed in art in a very strong and vital and avant-garde medium. So every piece of film that we made, every exhibition that we curated was a celebration of this. And to me, it felt like the antidote to the purely sexualization of women's bodies that were absolutely everywhere else. And lad mags, nuts, etc. were still very much in circulation then. So in this slide in particular, there's a photo from an exhibition that was curated in Paris called Virtual Physical Bodies. And these giant spheres were suspended from the ceiling with projections of hands, arms, eyes, textiles and details. My work with them involved the production of these videos and implementing them in these unusual spaces and dimensions. And I went on to direct documentation crews for some of the live dance theatre projects that we worked on. Now, this is a music video I made many years later, and my treatment of the body through dance and movement with a focus on strength, I feel was probably informed by my experiences there. There's a moment about 1 minute 45 which represents almost a battle cry from the artist Toya de Lazy, and we choreographed this piece to marry with that message. So I'll show you a bit of that.
Everyone talks about price in the city. Rent too high, space tight in the city. All one could take a bite out of the but everything got its price, gotta work. Looking where they go and get tough, fight in it. So everyone keeps high as a kite, they match. Weekends are lost to the hype, simply stuff. Feel a little light, slipping right every dust. Survival's a must. Can't slip through the sits all the time, fighting dust. Can bob to the system and it's tough, but living up. Cause how feeds are before the streets give us up. Price was a pity if people got to love. We going on a hub. Stay out all night, yeah, we burning it up. If you ain't living life, then you're not one of us. Cause all my buddies are just diamonds in the rough. 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 Everyone talks about price in the city. It'll take love to the smack really quickly. God, let me still with me. Don't care about the cost, I'm going full victory. My heart's not a rock, you know my honesty. Just not used to the love and it's no mystery. When you're new to the buzz, it all looks pretty. But reality is that we in the dark and we hoping that the light creeps in. Can't let the walls close in. My stomach growls within. Just holding on, healing. The city needs trusting. I heard the street child sing, money's the root of sin. Can't let the lights go dim, keep digging deeper still. Inspired that iron will, passion that makes you feel hunger you can't conceal. The gifts you share with zeal, believer or heathen. We are our own healing. The change the world's needing. Keep this heart beating. Diamonds in the rough, even in the rush, it's all we know. Diamonds in the rough, diamonds in the rough, diamonds in the
So that was Toya de Lazy. And after Body Data Space, I went on to work within a corporate company. Initially as a junior motion graphic designer, and with the unwavering support of my female boss, I was able to grow my potential there. And it was why 3 years in, I implemented a creative filming department and mentored a global team of filmmakers. And I remember heading to New York to present a pitch for a complete rebrand of the company manifesto, taking the lift all the way up to the most intimidating floor and walking into a boardroom with my female colleague and fellow filmmaker to just a sea of very white middle-aged men. And I'm a confident person, but this was not an inclusive environment. And here was everyone in charge at the highest level, all the decision makers, and there was not one female face amongst them. So being in this position afforded me the ability to at least make sure that within the content we were creating, the content we were putting out there, a team made up of brilliant men and women that we could commit to featuring a diverse cast of employees. And when it came to hiring, I had my taste of how it can be done fairly and respectfully on the merits of an individual's ability and creativity that had nothing to do with their gender or the loudness of their watch. So when pretty much every talking head or company address came from one of the aforementioned identikit seniors, we endeavoured to make films about the women in leadership roles within the company, so that more and more young women joining this company and the many companies such as ours could see the possibilities. So, as you can see from my previous experiences learning about women within film and women behind the scenes of film, I started to realise how important a safe female environment for women to maybe express their sexuality or showcase their bodies really was. And this led me to contemplate the importance of the female gaze within film. And And this was at the forefront of my mind when I was approached by a Genevieve Lejeune to direct a promo for her company, Skirt Club. Now, Skirt Club hosts private parties for women only. They endeavour to create a safe and empowered space for women to explore their sexuality away from the male gaze. It's about women taking an unabashed ownership over their bodies and sexual desires in an environment that hadn't really existed before. It was born out of founder Genevieve's experience of mixed parties, whereby as a single woman it didn't always feel such a safe space. And any experiences there between women felt more like involuntarily putting on a show for the guys. So typically it's hosted as a very glamorous and luxurious cocktail party, with talks on anything from body confidence to shibari rope bondage, all done in beautiful surroundings. So when we, myself and a producer friend of mine, Rihanna, who I work with sometimes, teamed up and were planning to shoot this with Genevieve, we wanted to create something that would showcase all of these things. The promo crucially featured models that were attendees or had some affiliation with Skirt Club, so they came to us to be involved. And it was, of course, a closed set. So I'll show the promo now before talking about it anymore. So, sorry? Oh, really? Sorry, I didn't realize it was, yeah. So that was actually the version without all the text and everything, because I wanted you to see the footage more importantly. I should have done a not safe for work, shouldn't I?
No, I think it's good.
Okay. So our points of reference were high-end lingerie ads, Coco de Mer, Agent Provocateur. What I loved was subverting traditional roles within these scenarios. There's a person watching in the corner in a few scenes, and it's not a suited man for a change. But this is a promo film celebrating female sexuality, and crucially, it's made by women for women. So the idea and the pace was built around the female orgasm. It's represented by the dancer we keep returning to, and the rhythm of the way the body breathes during and the build-up at the end, where it all becomes a little bit more frenzied and out of focus. And I wanted to focus on the details, necklines, hands, lips, skin, etc., and just the suggestion of action at all points. So if the male gaze, or more accurately the heterosexual masculine gaze, creates a power imbalance supporting a patriarchal status quo, can the female gaze be like the male gaze? I came across an interesting article written by a writer and academic, Janik Lorick, that cites, films about women's sexuality often face censorship in ways that prove their subversiveness. For example, the makers of The Cooler, Boys Don't Cry and Blue Valentine claim that their films were rated R or NC-17 for depicting cunnilingus. Such scenes focus on female pleasure and undermine women's to-be-looked-atness. Censorship bodies like the Motion Picture Association of America seem to treat cunnilingus as more graphic than other forms of sex. So, out of the innumerable examples of stories where female sexuality told by male directors can be problematic, one that stuck out to me was the sex scenes in Blue is the Warmest Colour, for example. The prolonged, almost clinical, and to my mind erring on the pornographic which, as we know, pornography is probably the most basic and extreme example of the male gaze. The sex scenes in the film were all the more troubling because we know the actresses involved suffered. They felt coerced and have spoken numerous times publicly about what an ordeal the shoot was. So all of these countless examples that if we sat here we could collectively fill a book with show we need many more women behind the camera as in front. And there's no need to even mention the Weinsteins of the world here. To my knowledge, we have no harrowing stories of all female production sets yet. So there's some incredible bodies, such as Women in Film and Television and the Bird's Eye View film, to name two, that are focused on keeping this dialogue going, to keep the statistics out there. And there are women directors and filmmakers, and until we see the continuing shift in the right direction towards an equal power balance, an equal number of women in the decision-making roles in film and media, only then will we see stories about women, real women being told authentically. Patriarchy is as prevalent as ever, right? So I'm sure the statistics will be no surprise to you guys, but for anyone who isn't aware, last year's reports showed in 2017, females comprised 24% of protagonists in top grossing films. Only 32% of films featured 10 or more female characters in speaking roles last year. 79% had 10 or more male characters. So that's the top grossing films, the blockbusters. There's more statistics up there, obviously. But even in the world of independent film, where we might be inclined to think there's a more level playing field, it's the area where smaller stories, it's the kitchen sink dramas, and the marginalized stories get told by the margins, right? Well, looking at a study of women in independent film, 2016 to 17, 23 of the high-profile film festivals in the United States, AFI Fest, Sundance, SXSW Film Festival, etc. Overall, the films employed more than twice as many men as women, 72% versus 28% as directors, writers, producers, executive producers, editors, and cinematographers. So if there's a discrepancy between the genders on who's making the films, who's starring in the films, could it be that there's a link to whose job it is to tell us what films are worth watching? Findings indicate that women comprise 27% and men 73% of the top critics. Women wrote 24% and men 76% of the reviews during the study period. Men outnumbered women in every job title category considered. And as a result, films with male protagonists receive greater visibility than films with female protagonists. What a surprise. So I'm sure we're all in agreement that diversity is crucial for all areas of industry, not just because it's a buzzword at the moment, but because currently we have 50% of the human population finding that their stories are not as worth telling as the other 50%. So with all of that said and food for thought, I'd like to finish on something a little bit more positive. In 2015, I was fortunate enough to be involved in shooting a charity documentary about teaching financial literacy to women in remote villages in Assam in the northeast of India. And it was aiming to give them a sense of ownership over their businesses and respect and autonomy within their communities. It was just myself and a second camera op and a producer. Did being female afford me an access into these communities of women that was different? I was certainly conscious that we wanted these women to look empowered. Assam was suffering some of the worst flooding during that monsoon season in recent history. And for these small communities that relied largely on farming, it hit them really hard. A fact that made this project all the more pertinent because the income that these women were bringing to their families with weaving and basket making was needed more than ever. The women we were speaking to were largely illiterate. They hadn't been afforded an education as such, and their finances had, up until the program, been handed over to their husband or brother. So what they were learning through this program was how to save and bank and funnel their earnings into crucial things like their children's education. Assam was, despite these natural setbacks, full of dance and laughter like you would hope for any community, and it's really that I wanted to show. We don't need to push a poverty-porn narrative from a non-Western part of the world for people to understand just how important something like education is in all its forms, particularly for the less opportune women in these environments. The Girl Effect is a wonderful animation, by the way, along this topic that's well worth watching. So the footage for the charity is currently it's in another re-edit at the moment, but I'm going to play out a short film of shots from the trip that I hope show what a magical place Assam is and the lasting impression it left with me. If nothing else, it features a few minutes of beautiful regional music to enjoy, so I'm calling it A Love Letter to Assam. That's it, pretty much.
Nice.
Is that good?
How long is the video?
It's about 10 minutes, so we can just cut it out whenever you want. Or you can turn it down and talk over it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah.
Let's watch it.
Sure, you can. You can just turn it down whenever because it goes on. Enjoyed it? It's nice. Yeah, it's up to you. Yeah, yeah. I don't mind. It's up to you.
Leave it, I like it.
Okay. I do that?
From the screen, you'll see it, you press it, and then I'll turn the light.
How do I do it? That's it. There we go.
All right. So this is the sixth, I think, designer roles for this year, and then the previous people they've been attending, the guests,
Yep.
they've been discussing issues of gender in various areas.
Right. Okay.
I just remember the first one talking about how we bring people from multicultural backgrounds or various genders within a creative team.
Yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned this as well.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you a question starting from this
Yeah. Yeah.
final
Sure.
work. What do you think is missing at the moment from education, from the students? Because at the beginning of your talk about when you've been a student
Yeah.
10 years ago,
Yeah. Yeah.
12 years ago,
forget
that
this
you didn't have like kind of this kind of exposure to
No, not at
this
all.
kind of like concept ideas. What is gender? How is
Yeah.
the role of women or gay people within the society or within the creative industry?
Yep.
And now you're talking about your projects you do in India and
Yep.
South Africa as well.
Yeah.
So you want to give us?
But I think that's it. I mean, you've said it there. I mean, the fact is there's more opportunity now for people to get an understanding of these topics. You know, when I kind of went into my gender theory class, it was, you know, I had to kind of piece those pieces together for myself. And I'm so glad that there's things like this and there's discussions about it, and it's a conversation that's happening now, which wasn't so much, and it wasn't that long ago, you know. And I think that needs to happen across the board everywhere. I think by getting more women and genders and into the industry at places where you can make the decisions, that's how you then can make sure you foster an environment that's inclusive.
It is very difficult for young people,
Yeah.
younger people, to understand this kind of like. There's a thin line between why we need to think more about women into the creative industries,
Yep.
why we need to have
Yep.
like a balance between.
Yep.
Maybe it's something that they haven't been exposed as yet,
Yep.
and they're young designers.
Yep.
In a couple of years' time, they will be outside there.
Yeah.
They will be challenged with these questions.
Yes.
Any advice before we pass this?
Well, I think that's it. I think you just have to. Now there's more and more women going through the courses and getting the education that we need, and there are more filmmakers, there are more women that want to be directors, etc. I think just going out there and being as confident as you can with your work, because nobody else is going to wave that flag for you. You've got to represent yourself. You've got to sell yourself, and I mean, I guess that's it really.
I think the balance comes from the thinking.
Yeah.
It comes from them.
Exactly.
Allowing to this to happen
Yeah.
rather than. Okay. Would you do you have any questions, and we can.
Who is it to blame for women not going into these creative fields?
Oof.
Blame someone. Blame someone.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's any one thing. I think if we want to just broadly, this patriarchal structure that we're all party to. It's not. You don't think it exists systematically. Well, I think that's a conversation unto itself, isn't it? Probably a bit.
Why would you blame it on the patriarchy?
Because if there's no example of women if young women don't see other young women making stuff or telling the stories, then
There's a lot of
Role models in a way. Yeah.
role models, yeah.
there's a lot of women in other fields. Maybe this is about life choices.
But I think everybody has the opportunity to be storytellers. I don't think one gender is better at that than the other.
Obviously, but why do we need to have women? Why don't we just need to have people that are there based on their merit?
Oh, well, absolutely, that's the case. But without the visibility, so there's, what I was kind of touching on with some of those statistics and things is if we're not seeing that, those stories are being told. There are women in those fields. They're not being given the same platform, perhaps, to get their films out there.
To add to this, we live in a society which, we want it or not, this is a male society. And we are in the UK,
Yeah.
which is a bit more, there is a bit more balance on that. I'm not gonna say there is balance, but
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
looks like. But taking into account India, for example, or other countries that they are still under development in various areas, especially in creative industries, the role of women is not as powerful as here. Despite the fact we have a prime minister as a woman, doesn't mean say
Yeah.
anything.
Well, there's nobody there making those stories. That's why we had to go over there to tell that story. But these women have a story to tell. So it's just they're not given the platform or the opportunity to do so. And that's what we kind of need to change, I think.
Any other questions from the crowd? No. Yes.
This is more about like the work that you've done. I saw you've done work with like the NBA and like Netflix.
Yeah.
Like massive corporations like that. So how you like? Did you say you was a freelancer?
Yeah.
How have you gone about to secure those people as well? But how have they approached you?
Yeah. I think it was kind of, it's that old thing about making connections and networking and things. That's basically how it's all done. And then once I did a few pieces for a couple of production companies, they get to trust you and like your work, and they know they can rely on you, and then you get called back, and then the next time the phone rings, it's somebody else who's connected to that company and says, oh, hey, we heard you made this. We'd really love you to come on board and do this. And it just springboards from that. But there was a lot of stuff before that of just kind of hawking my wares everywhere I could and kind of just making lots of stuff for free, as you do. Unfortunately.
Yeah. That's not gender related. This is
No,
general.
that's just a general thing. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Sammy at the back there? No? You're just pointing at things. Okay, no, I think coming back to Luca's point, but like, I know it's a big
It is,
debate,
yeah, I was like, oh
but
God,
like,
okay.
Yeah, I think that the slide that you showed, which showed the systematic context of
Yeah.
that, was really interesting. So this slide where you were talking about this idea of the big Hollywood films, grossing
Yep.
Hollywood films are having
Yes.
this kind of representation. The
Independent.
films are having this level of involvement, and additionally, the
The critics, so the people who,
are in a certain way as well. And the interesting thing about that was also the even greater problems when you start talking about intersectionality.
Yes.
So like, the diverse ethnic groups that are involved in those conversations.
Yeah.
So like, Laura was talking about the gender issues, but if you looked at the quotes that she highlighted, there was even smaller numbers of
Tiny
Black
numbers,
and
really,
Asian
awful.
film directors, makers.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not just gender issues. It's completely
Yeah.
It's the broad
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
and disbalanced in multiple
Really is.
ways. And so what I was really interested in is, you've obviously worked with some really interesting black artists,
Mhm.
female
Yeah.
artists, and what your experience of that has been, and what their feeling of how they bring their stories to life has been, and
Yeah.
how you create that working relationship together.
I think, well, particularly, so Toya DeLazy, the one I showed, if I use that as an example, she's over from South Africa, where she's quite well known over there, and she really wanted to crack into the market here. I think she's doing quite well now. She's in the charts for her latest song. But she was very adamant that she didn't want to present a sexualized image or to just rely on, because she's a fabulous looking person, and she didn't want to rely on any of that stuff. She wanted to use her body and her power and her strength, because she feels that there needs to be more black androgynous as well, androgyny being put out there into the mainstream. So she had a lot of very creative control over that, and I mean that was totally my ball game. So I was like, yeah, brilliant, let's do it. But I think that's it. I think it's just more representation, getting it out there, and not also feeling like you have to depend on those old tropes, or the sexualization of black women in media is another topic as well. the fetishization of black women, and I think it's about making the antidote to those stories.
It's very current. I don't know. Maybe social media, maybe us, maybe I don't know society. It's influencing students to think more into social problems,
Yeah.
issues, and gender. That's why the reason of having the diversity and inclusivity as a theme, because lots of students have concerns regarding where we're going, what we're expecting, where we're going, where do we belong? Do we belong
Yeah.
in the society?
Yeah.
And you mentioned this data space earlier about technology,
Yeah.
and you said you work with Ghislaine. Ghislaine is one of our
Yes.
colleagues.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So
She started it all. So
she started
like
all,
she's my
So it's a shame she's not here tonight because she said she couldn't make it.
yeah.
So I'd like to know a bit about technology. Technology, it's one of this kind of disciplines, or it used to be,
Yeah.
that we've seen less women in the past, and
Yeah.
maybe more women now.
Yes.
Why?
Women in STEM. That's a whole other thing as well. isn't
Women
it?
STEM, yeah, true. So
Just give the acronym because not everyone might know.
Oh, I think it's science, technology. Oh gosh, engineering
Mathematics.
and mathematics. That was it. Yeah.
this is why the universities like Greenwich is, which includes all these kind of disciplines.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I would like to know, like, why you think that it's not developed as far as up to this point. Now we are in 21st century,
Yeah.
and we still have issues when it comes to women in technology or thinking about multi-gender or
Yeah.
gender in general. In this
I
area.
wonder if that's because young women coming through the system in university think it's a bit more closed off to them. It's not something when you're going and studying something at university, you're probably thinking about the end goal or where you might like to go for a career. And I think if you don't see examples of yourself out there in the careers that you might really want to be in, you might think, oh, do you know what? I'll pick something a bit safer, or I'll study something that I know I can see other women doing. And I think that's, I think there's obviously is changing now, but it's probably got it's had a knock-on effect, I think.
Any question? I can ask one more. All right.
Yeah, go on then.
What we're challenging students to do in general is to approach their projects, writing or making, from a very personal approach.
Yeah.
We have a group of students, not only here but in general university,
Yeah.
that 20 to 25% comes from different cultural background or even different sexual orientation. Okay, so just an advice to these students that they would like to communicate through their work
Yes.
to the wider
Yeah.
community, how to approach their own personal experiences to their projects, or how to express themselves.
Well, do you mean in what medium, or whether
No,
they
I
should?
mean like more or less what to think, how to encourage them maybe.
Well, I think it's imperative. I think everything you make is an extension of you, even if it's for the big corporate clients. There's you in it. So I think that's a brilliant place to start, is to make stuff that means something to you, because you're going to tell that story, with some heart and some passion in it, because you feel something for it, and keep doing that. It's hard thing about creating and making, because you put your stuff up, even now you put your stuff up on the screen, and then you're putting it out there. You're putting your heart and soul out there, and it's a terrifying thing to do. But I think the more you do it, the more you get used to it, and the more you then realize where your potential is, and what. I think it's imperative. Yeah.
How do you approach people in industry if you're met with opinions that are anti-feminist or anti-women, or homophobic, or along those lines? Like, how do you approach that if you have to work for them, or if you're working with them on a project?
Okay, so I think it's always best to approach it calmly. I had a situation 2 days ago. I'm working with a creative director at the moment on a piece, and I was in the meeting with him. There was myself, another producer, my boss on the project. He's a woman, and And we talked about it, it was really exciting, blah, blah, blah. He went away, he came back with a script. It was all guys in the script. It was an all-male cast, all-male protagonists. And we just thought, okay, what has he not got here that, you know, so I just sent him a very nice email back. And I just said, we value diversity here and believe in gender equality. So I think you might need to rewrite the script. And he came back straight away and just said, understood. So I think it's just kind of being, okay, it's okay, you know, not everybody's, you know, you're going to work with these people, unfortunately. But yeah, just calmly kind of tell them what they need to do.
I think it's that's why you have this kind of discussions here. I think that you guys are the people changing this.
Well, exactly, yeah.
This environment and the space.
And hopefully that happens less and less when you guys start to do
I think
these
it's a
things.
really good approach as well to, like, you know, just as you said, just calmly just discuss it with the person, and
Yeah.
it might be that they haven't even thought about it.
But I think that's the thing, isn't
and
it?
that's
You
the
know,
problem, obviously,
yeah.
But it's also, you know, if they haven't thought about it, then you're effectively helping them to
Just give them a nudge.
Yeah,
and
because
say-
in the next project they do, they'll then
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah, we hope. Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's like, you know, it's possible that maybe
Yeah.
creates a kind of a change. So the more people that you work
Yeah.
with, and the more people that you say, well, have you considered
Yeah.
this thing?
Yeah, exactly. Incidentally, I've heard that in the rewrite, he's the main protagonist is now a woman as well. So
There you go.
he took the hint.
Yeah.
Any one more last question because we have to keep on time. Maybe not. Chris, you want to say something?
Sure, I've always got a question. I'm really interested in the way that you're representing women in India and the way that maybe in Africa. Is it a similar project or is it a different project?
So this one in Africa is working with. Well, no, it's not just women, but it's working with entrepreneurs in Uganda to kind of help them kind of get their businesses off the ground, and it's the same kind of to the same ends, I suppose. But yeah, slightly different project.
And I was really interested in this comment that you made. It was kind of a throwaway comment, but it was kind of like about this idea of poverty porn.
Yes, yeah,
And it's like it's such a thing in the charity sector.
yeah,
And we've had quite a few students writing dissertations about this as well. We had a couple of years ago. Forgotten.
Yeah, I can. They have the camera.
Yes.
I can speak. now.
Anyway, yeah, a student a couple of years ago that was particularly interested in images of impoverished African children on the tube and on the thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
it's this
yeah,
kind of ethical issue of children not. How are children being asked for their ethical approval of that?
I know.
You know, what are those images doing? What does it mean to show
Yeah.
them within society?
Yes.
And I was just interested in. You said that the film in India you were working with a charity.
Yes, it was.
So how they're kind of conceptualizing this different approach.
Well, that's the thing, and I was also very conscious of, you know, being a white female, middle class female going over there. I didn't want to be like, oh, look at you know, these people and all this kind of stuff. So I was very conscious of being careful about it, which is why I wanted to show them mainly in a really empowered light and happy light and not focusing on that too much. But I think it is a hard thing to do. I think it's not, you know, when you start just only focusing on images like that, you're not doing it for an altruistic reasons. You're kind of doing it, I don't know, it's something a bit more sinister about it, I feel. I mean, you're only focusing on, you know, on impoverished peoples.
I mean, this student was it from Zambia or?
I can't remember now.
It was from, I think he was from Zambia,
Mm-hmm.
and he was really interested in rewriting those narratives as a Zambian
Yeah.
about
No,
what
it was,
Zambia
yeah,
is.
actually, yes. It was, now it came to
You
my
could-
head.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Chi.
Yeah.
So he was working on the idea of how we are, as Western culture,
Yeah.
identify or understand this culture.
Yeah.
How the culture itself, like the Zambians, they see themselves,
Yeah.
or how a Zambian that lives
Yes.
abroad perceives
Yeah.
the culture
Yeah.
by looking from outside
Yeah.
as an outsider. And I could see that this kind of three direct,
approach,
it's creating a narrative itself, and then you say
Yeah.
that I am looking the issue myself
Yeah.
from three different perspectives.
That's really
I'm
cool.
an observer, I'm a
Yeah.
participant, I'm at the same time a critical,
Yeah.
creating critical debate.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to see how we fit in that kind of
That's true.
environment.
I think that's really interesting, you know, because, you know, we don't want to, you don't want to focus too much on we're the saviours going in to these people. I think with this project specifically, I was very keen to make the women did the talking. So we actually, you know, this is why it's being re-edited again now, is that they form the narrative, not us. We didn't direct them to say certain things. It was like, okay, you know, you've been on this program doing this stuff. That's cool. How has it helped you? How has it not helped you? You know, what about this? And it was, we just filmed, you know, reels and reels of interviews with these women and kind of let them tell the story for themselves, because I think that was the key thing, rather than us being, you know.
Well, I would have plenty more questions
No,
about
Yeah.
that,
you
but
can
I
keep
think
up,
that
later.
well,
All right.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Laura, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you very much.
It was very good to see what
Cool.
you're doing.
That's great.
I hope that we will see you soon.
Yeah.
Next week we're gonna have Christian Caster. He's gonna talk about diversity in editorial design. So he's the art director for AD magazine. So he's gonna talk about how we bring together people from diverse design backgrounds within a page. So yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, guys.